Somewhere out there right now, there is a patch of sky that your great-great-grandparents would recognize. A sky so full of stars it looks like someone spilled salt across black velvet. A sky where the Milky Way isn't a concept you read about in a textbook, but just something that's always there above you every single night, close enough to feel like it's breathing, and you have probably never seen it, not the way they saw it, because we did something to the night, something quiet and slow and so gradual we barely noticed until it was already gone. Let's go back way back about 1 million years ago when one of our ancestors did something that changed the entire trajectory of the human species. Not the wheel, not a law, not a city. They kept a fire burning through the night. And that sounds small, but it wasn't. Because before controlled fire, darkness was a death sentence. The moment the sun went down, every predator that wanted to eat you had a massive advantage. You couldn't see and they could smell. The night belonged to them, but fire changed that equation completely. Suddenly you had a circle of light, a perimeter, a force field made of flame, and lions and hyenas that had been hunting humans for millions of years would not cross it. But here's what nobody talks about enough. Fire didn't just protect early humans, it extended the day by 2 to 4 hours every single night. And in that pocket of warmth and light, in the middle of the dark, human culture was actually born. Because you've eaten, you're safe, you're not hunting, and you're not being hunted, you're just sitting together around the fire. And what do? You talk, you tell stories, you explain why the stars move and invent gods to explain the things that scare you. You pass down the memory of a drought from 3 generations ago so your grandchildren will know what to do when it happens again. You sing, you argue, you fall in love, and every myth, every legend, every campfire ghost story, every piece of human culture that has ever existed was born in that window. The campfire wasn't just a survival tool. It was the first television, the first internet, the first church. Homer didn't write the Odyssey during the day. Nobody listened to it during the day either. The great oral traditions of every ancient civilization, Greek, Mesopotamian, Aboriginal, Australian, West African, were all-night traditions. You gathered when the work was done and when the light was gone and someone would begin. And the darkness wasn't an obstacle to storytelling. It was the ingredient. It stripped away everything else. There was nowhere to go and nothing to look at except the fire and the faces of the people around you, and the dark forced you to listen. Now here is something nobody taught you in school. For most of recorded human history, thousands and thousands of years, people did not sleep in 1 8-hour block. They slept in 2. The first sleep would begin shortly after dark, a few hours of deep, heavy sleep where the body does most of its repair work, and then somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. people would simply wake up, not because they had to, not because of an alarm or a noise outside. They would just naturally surface into a calm, quiet wakefulness that lasted anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, and this window had a name. They called it the watch. In medieval France, they called it dorveille, a dream-wake hybrid state where the boundary between sleeping and waking wasn't a wall but a doorway you could stand in, and then without any effort they would fall back into the second sleep until dawn. Historians have found references to this pattern everywhere, in Homer, in Chaucer, in medical texts from the 1300s, and the phrase first sleep appears so commonly in historical documents that researchers believe biphasic sleep wasn't a quirk, it was the human default. So what did people actually do during the watch medieval records tell us? They prayed, they reflected. Doctors in the 1300s specifically recommended the watch as the best time to think through problems. Because the mind was uniquely calm, not fully alert and not fully dreaming, a borderline state they considered almost medicinal. And some people walked, and some people ate a small meal, and some people reported that their most creative thoughts arrived in this space between sleeps, like gifts. And here's what's strange. If you've ever woken at 2 a.m. and found yourself unusually clear-headed and calm in a way that doesn't happen during the day, you may have been briefly accessing this ancient state because the human brain was never designed for 8 straight hours of unconsciousness. It was designed to surface and check in with the world and think and then go back down, and we called it insomnia while they called it Tuesday. In 1992, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware took a group of volunteers and put them in rooms with no artificial light, 14 hours of darkness per night, for a month, and the first week they slept more than usual, catching up on a sleep debt they hadn't even known they were carrying. But then by the second and third week, without being told to, without any instruction or suggestion, every single volunteer settled into the same pattern. First sleep, the watch. Second sleep, emerging naturally like a reflex that hadn't been used in so long it had been assumed extinct. And Ware described the watch period in his subjects as a state of quiet wakefulness, low heart rate, elevated prolactin, the same hormone released during meditation, and his subjects described it as the calmest, most peaceful mental state they had ever experienced. They weren't sleeping, and they weren't anxious about not sleeping. They were simply awake in the dark, and it felt by all accounts like something their bodies had been waiting to do for their entire lives. What does that tell you? It tells you that what millions of people call insomnia, that maddening 2M wakefulness we've been medicated for and therapized for and white noise machined into submission for, might not be a disorder at all. It might just be your body doing exactly what it was built to do in the wrong century. So how did we get here? How did we go from a species that slept in 2 natural phases and treated the middle of the night as a sacred creative space to a species that pops melatonin supplements and considers 8 uninterrupted hours? Such a rare luxury, we brag about it. One invention, one specific wavelength, blue light, because your eyes contain specialized receptors whose entire job is to detect a specific type of light and signal to your brain that the sun is up, that it's morning, that it's time to stop producing melatonin and wake the whole system up. And those receptors are tuned specifically to blue wavelengths, the same wavelengths emitted by your phone screen, your laptop, your LED lights, your television at 11 p.m. And every time you look at a screen after dark, a message gets sent to your brain that says, morning, the sun is rising, suppress the melatonin, stop preparing for sleep. And your brain doesn't know it's a lie because it's a million-year-old system being tricked by a device invented 40 years ago. And the result is a society of people who are biologically exhausted, who cannot achieve the quality of sleep their bodies were designed for, who then blame themselves for not sleeping well, who then reach for their phones to scroll themselves back to drowsiness, which just makes it worse. There's a photograph that circulates occasionally online, a composite image of the Earth at night taken from space, and what you see is a planet half covered in gold light, the outlines of every continent traced not by geography but by electricity, and it's beautiful, honestly, from up there. But from down here, that photograph means that the majority of people alive today have never seen the Milky Way with their own eyes. Not just faintly, but not at all. Because light pollution has erased it for 80% of North Americans and 60% of Europeans, an entire galaxy, billions of stars gone, not destroyed, but drowned in our own glow, and our ancestors didn't have a word for light pollution because they didn't need one. The night sky was just the night sky. It was the same sky that made ancient Greeks invent astronomy and made Pacific Islanders navigate thousands of miles of open ocean by star patterns alone, and made every civilization on Earth develop cosmology, an attempt to understand their place in something so much larger than themselves. And people who live without light pollution don't just sleep better, they report higher levels of awe. That specific emotion that happens when you encounter something so much larger than yourself that your sense of self temporarily dissolves, and awe has been linked to reduced anxiety and increased generosity and a measurably better sense of perspective. And your ancestors felt that every single night for free just by looking up we took that away, not out of malice, not through some grand conspiracy, just through the slow accumulation of progress that nobody stopped to evaluate until it was already everywhere. We didn't break the night on purpose, we just forgot to ask if we should. Anyway, that's enough existential dread for one video. The things that might actually help are small and almost embarrassingly simple. Turn off overhead lights after 9 p.m., use warm bulb colors, take the phone out of the bedroom, or just sit in the dark for a few minutes before bed and let your eyes remember what quiet feels like. And if this made you want to go stand outside and look at the sky tonight, do it. I'm serious. And if you want more stuff that makes you feel quietly weird about being alive, subscribe, because I've got about 17 more of these and they only get worse. in the best possible way. Good night.